The Windmill Boy is an animated film born from the imagination of first-time director Dan Richards. The story tells of a boy kept prisoner in a windmill by an evil horde. The film's story required large sets with hundreds of props, which were painstakingly made, mostly by a young, up-and-coming crew, on a negligible budget. Director Dan Richards is an animator from Faversham in Kent, who studied at the Bristol School of Animation. Over the past year, Dan has been working at Canterbury Christ Church University as their first ever animator in residence. It was here as a student back in 2003 that Dan created the character of Windmill Boy, and in his final animation assignment, the first incarnation of Windmill Boy was born.
When I made my first Windmill Boy film at university, the ideas behind it were very kind of gothic and come from German expressionist films. It was about this little character in this very dark, nightmarish world. So there was lots of shots with Windmill Boy having long shadows, and all the buildings were very kind of curled over with sharp points and stuff. And the whole world was really kind of one big nightmare. When I set out designing the new Windmill Boy film, I did want to keep certain aspects from the first film. I also wanted to take it in a kind of new direction. Whereas the first film was just set in kind of like this nightmare world, in the new film I wanted to kind of show that the whole world existed. Influences for the film come from a lot of different places, really. One example is the town within the film. For instance, the Guildhall which the Mayor and Cotswold live in, that's directly based on the Guildhall which is in Faversham. And the Windmill which Windmill Boy lives in, that's actually based on Sale Windmill in Kent. At the start of the summer I wasn't really planning to make a film. I'd kind of written ideas down and done some sketches in a sketchbook. But it wasn't until I was offered the position of animator in residence at Canterbury Christ Church University that I even thought about making the film in the summer. But then once I'd got my position, I then had access to equipment and the studio. Then there was lots of animation and film students which I then thought could come along and help me. I then discussed the kind of project a little bit more with Steve Allen, who kind of come on board with ideas for the models and the designs. And then I gave a few friends I knew from animating in Bristol, see if they could come down and do some animation on the film. And then kind of one thing led to another, and it kind of snowballed into this massive monster project.
Before animating could begin, the characters and sets needed to be produced. To lead the model-making production, Dan approached Steve Allen, a model maker of over 25 years' experience, who began his career at Jim Henson's Creature Workshop. Steve's role is not only to design the models, but also to negotiate the logistics of their production and animation.
When Dan first came to me, he had this idea of this incredible world that had flying windmills, a village, forests, loads of people, thousands of little props, you name it. This thing had everything you'd see in a normal full-scale film. And I thought, okay, fine, this would be good. Give us the budget, and then we find out that there is no budget. And you just sit there and think, well, Christ, how are we going to do this?
Creating the eerie world of Windmill Boy was not an easy task. It took many months of research, invention, and conceptualizing. Much of this development took place in meetings between Dan and production designers Steve Allen and Ollie Webb.
My role in the film was to take Dan's briefs and sketches and turn them into a more artistic, sort of detailed form, which then the modellers could turn into a three-dimensional form. Initially, I sat down with Dan and went through it a lot, asked what he wanted, and we sort of came up with the things. I sort of drew what was I basically envisioned in my head. He sort of said if he liked that or not, or added my own little sort of twist again. and came to a happy medium.
The first thing that Dan asked me to do was to come up with the designs for the full-scale windmill, the pump, and all the various little mechanisms and so on that go inside. Little objects like this, you need a lot of little tiny mechanisms and so on to make this thing work, and so you can animate it. The thing I loved about this was Dan wanted this attention to detail, and if you look throughout the movie, that detail is just shown everywhere. And if you take the full-scale windmill, for instance, I mean, that had over 600 copper nails in it. No one's ever going to see that, but that's the sort of detail we wanted. The flying windmill required a lot of rig points, a lot of moving parts in it. And I think that really is the strongest part. It has a lovely moment at the end when you see that thing change into a flying mobile.
The many sets, characters, and props all needed to be made before animating could begin. It took a period of 14 weeks with more than 20 model makers working solidly to create the magical world of Windmill Boy.
As a model maker on the film, each day me and at least 6 other people would be crammed into Dan's garage, making moulds, casting, making little props and painting them, and basically every prop and finished little detail you see on the film is down to the model making crew.
The model maker's most challenging task was creating the town of Hungerwood Heath, which features prominently throughout the film. With its numerous buildings and hundreds of props and models, it took several days just to assemble it.
From the designs that Dan had given us, we first of all made the heads out of Chavante clay, which we sculpted, and then from those clay heads we made push moulds, which the plasticine heads were produced from. The reason that we used plasticine heads is because all of the animators working on the film had previous experience with working with plasticine, and also it gave allowed for the characters to have quite a wide range of expression, like facial expressions.
On the film I was in charge of puppet fabrication. This mainly consisted of the puppets' costumes and putting them together, but also smaller things such as the sacks which the bread's carried in the Punch and Judy show, and other things that were material based. Because the puppets needed to be animated, they were lined with a thin piece of wire. This allowed the animators to move them a tiny bit between each frame. Windmill Boy's coat was the worst of this because it needed to be animated in the storm. It took about 3 days to make, and it was a complete nightmare.